Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, 8 knife making tools that fly under the radar. So there are a bunch of mission critical tools in the knife maker's shop. The belt grinder's the obvious one, but if you're forging, of course, you'll need a forge, you'll need an anvil, maybe a power hammer or a hydraulic forge press, but there are a bunch of low glamour tools that are just as important. So today, the 8 most underappreciated, most underrated tools in the knife maker's shop. They're easy to overlook, and with a few exceptions, they're pretty cheap. But man, are they useful. This little sucker right here is a Machinist Parallel. They're just what they sound like. They're a steel bar with all the sides ground parallel to each other, or perpendicular as the case may be. Now, there are all kinds of situations where you need to position something nice and square, and these tools are the ones to do it with. They're great for shimming things up in vices so that you can maintain your work nice and flat to the table of your drill press, mill, or even to grinders or saws. Flatness is important in knife making. A granite machinist block is made to verify flatness, and you can buy cheap ones, at least cheap by the standards of machining, that are plenty flat for most uses in the knife shop. And if you can't afford a granite block, any really flat surface, an aluminum block, a piece of masonite, a scrap of kitchen countertop, will serve just as well for many knife making tasks. Squareness is really important in knife making. A carpenter's square, like this right here, is really unwieldy and often not very accurate. So a cheap set of machinist squares, that's these little suckers right here, will find endless uses in the shop. Squaring up tables, checking edges, verifying flatness. I just leave them lying around the shop and I find myself grabbing them constantly. You don't need a fancy set of sterrets. A cheapo set from China won't set you back much and will be plenty accurate for knife making and will be worth every penny. There are a million kinds of clamps, and if you had 10 of every kind on the planet, you'd still run out sometimes. Half the battle in doing most things in the knife making shop is just figuring out a way to hold on to something efficiently. For my money, the most useful clamp is the welder's clamp. They're cheap, simple to use, and endlessly useful. My number 2 clamp is the bar clamp. I've got them in many varieties. After that, C-clamps. And beyond that, there are just endless numbers of clamps. Toggle clamps, cant twists, beam clamps, angle brackets, pipe clamps, all kinds of stuff. Each time you go to Home Depot, just grab a clamp or two. Pretty soon you'll have all you need. Well, except for all the other ones you need. Let's start with this, the drill vise. Now this is the cheapest, grossest, yuckiest Chinese drill vise imaginable, but still totally useful. What it does is keep your work nice and parallel to your drill press so that you can steady it and move it around on the table of your press without throwing off parallelism. Super useful. Once you get one, you'll wonder how you ever got by without. The key point to be aware of is that when you crank the jaws shut, the movable jaw kind of bows up and it throws your work off parallel. So you have to be aware of that, and you have to do something like whacking it down to the bottom with a mallet to make sure that it stays parallel. Which brings us to this beast, the Kurt vise. If you have a mill, you just gotta have a Kurt vise or one of its clones. Aside from being ginormous, the key distinction between this and the cheap vise is that unlike the drilling vise, the Kurt is designed so that when the jaws advance, they don't move out of parallel. Very expensive, but worth every penny. Now you don't need them for a drill press, just for a mill. Which in turn brings us to this little secret weapon right here, the tool maker's vise. Unlike the drill vise, they're designed so that the jaws will stay parallel, and all the sides are ground parallel or perpendicular as the case may be. This allows you to set up your workpiece in them nice and steady and then flip the vise around so that you can drill, mill, grind, saw, whatever from all different sides of the piece, maintaining that 90-degree or 180-degree relationship with whatever else you've been doing the whole time. You can also clamp them in other vices, allowing you to move a workpiece around without dicking around with totally new clamping setups, or even you can set it on certain specific angles and then maintain that 24-degree angle or something that's non-90 degree. They come in a variety of sizes, not super cheap unfortunately, but super handy. Now, for most uses in the knife shop, you don't need a pair of $200 Mitutoyo calipers. I use these $30 calipers constantly. They're accurate enough for most things in the knife shop, and if you drop them on the floor, you won't cry. Constant use in my shop. I bought one of the first generation cordless drills and it was a total piece of crap. No torque, no battery life, absolute garbage. So I stayed away from the cordless world for way too long. Now the newer generations, like this, of cordless tools are just in a whole different league. A few years back, I finally bought this drill and was immediately kicking myself for waiting so long to go cordless. This is literally the only tool I have that doesn't have a specific storage place in my shop. It just lies on a work surface all the time. Why? Because not an hour goes by that I don't use it. And why be digging around in some box for it all the time? And guess what? I almost never use it for drilling. That's what drill presses are for. But for screwing things, Allen wrenches, countersinks, chamfering holes, tapping, power feeding your mill table, I mean, they're just millions of things you can do with it. With that in mind, don't even think about buying one without also buying a set of hex drivers, screwdrivers, star drives, all that kind of stuff. Unbelievably useful. The number one most underrated tool in the knife maker's shop, this right here, the file. The file is absolutely the foundation of all metalworking. Bastard files and mill files in the 10-inch range are an absolute must for any knife maker's shop. But there are so many other forms of files that you'll find useful too. Rasps, floats, hobby files, diamond files, riffler files, round files, chainsaw files. There are tons of files and millions of uses for them. Back in the day when a machinist was an apprentice, they had to demonstrate that they could do basically anything with a file before they could start touching power tools. The reason for this is that just about anything that can be done with a mill or a grinder can also be done with a file. Often, when you can't reach something or you just need to make that final adjustment, the file is the only tool that'll do. Let me make one last point here. You'll notice that most of these are machinist tools. Now, high-end machinist tools are incredibly expensive and for good reason. If you're a machinist, they're worth every cent. But for us lowly knife makers, a lot of the time we really don't need to pay 5 times as much money to squeeze that last, 3/10,000ths of an inch of performance out of that tool. So the cheap Chinese stuff works just fine for most of us. There's a lot of nuance to this, and if you're making folding knives, you probably want the higher quality type measuring tools. But for most of us, with the tools that I'm talking about here, you don't need to spend big money on the really high-end gear, at least not to start with. All right, thanks guys, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching, guys. If you feel like you got something out of this video, don't forget to subscribe. Also, click on the link to Patreon for a great way to give back to the channel. Plus, check me out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Links in the description. If you want something sharp and pointy, maybe a gift for yourself or one of the cooler people in your life, check out my Tactics Armory website and pick up one of our tactical or outdoor knives. And finally, if you want to learn to make Hamones or Japanese swords, check out WalterSorrellsBlades.com, where you can find videos about how I make Hamones, as well as forging, mounting, polishing, and fittings for Japanese swords. Thanks, and see you soon.